Thank you, Pooja, for nice words spoken about me. I'm so happy to be here once again in ITS, with the only difference that most of the earlier occasions I have been talking on some specific subject which Sunil used to decide about some hardcore area of computer science or information technology. But I'm so happy that this time they decided to have a webinar on national policy of education, primarily for awareness of all the teachers and their contribution. I'm so happy to find my colleague, Professor Jagdish Kumar here, uh, very eminent electrical engineer. We both belong to the same broad discipline in the sense and know each other for decades. And now I think for last couple of years, we have been talking about NEP also together several times. So if there are some overlaps, please bear with us because we have been sharing the same beliefs. I'm happy to see young dynamic Vice Chairman Arpit to be here with the faculty as a motivator, as a dynamic young leader, and taking the institution forward. And when he said that I'm available to ITS whenever they want me, let me assure them that as long as your intentions remain as pious as you are, I will continue to be available to you for furthering the cause of education, because that's what I look forward to. I will touch some of the aspects of NEP because throughout the day, not only Professor Jagdish Kumar, thereafter you have Professor Pant, Professor Vineet Kansal, and Professor Ranjana Arora. All of them can, I think, talk full day about NEP. So I like to touch some of the points, and I will also like to respond to some of the challenges which Arpit decided to flag off this morning. Friends, it's right that we have got the national education policy after a big gap of 34 years. And people call all of us that it's a very ambitious policy. It wants so much to be done. But please also remember 34 years in a knowledge age is too much of a period to have missed so many things. I read an article on medical knowledge. It says in 1950, the knowledge used to double every 50 years. In 1980, it used to double every 20 years. In 2010, it used to double every 10 years. And we hope when the things are analyzed, in 2020, knowledge may be doubling in less than 1 year period. Now, when that is the rate of doubling of knowledge, imagine a policy coming after 34 years. Obviously, it had to have too many deliverables, too much to ask for the society, because we had missed too many things. So therefore, I think that was the only solution, that we had to sort of cover up everything which we wanted. And over this period of 70 years, our education system had also expanded like anything quantitatively. If I see, we started with 3 universities in the country and we have now 1,000+ universities and 40,000+ colleges. So expansion is quite phenomenal, despite the fact that our GER is still much poorer than even many of the developing countries. Well, people do say, well, where is the hurry to increase GER? But my counter question is, how long we can afford to continue to remain an uneducated nation? A nation has to be an educated nation. A nation has to be a healthy nation. Then only it can be a productive nation. And I will go a step further, then only it can be an independent nation. If you don't remain educated, if you don't remain healthy, somebody will eat the nation up one day, which we cannot be afforded to. Therefore, to increase GER is understandable. It had to be done. And a very basic step or basic premise which has been taken in the policy is we have started talking from school education onwards. Because if school GER becomes 100%, then only 50% in higher education will be a realistic figure to achieve. And therefore, effort on school education has been done. This is for the first time, I think, I've seen a policy which has encompassed preschool education and PhD and postdoctoral education. So the span of education is almost our entire life of the child from the age of 3 till all continuous learning, which all of us will have to do. So you should please appreciate if a policy has to encompass so much, then obviously so many things have to be thought of, have to be done. I'll take a few minutes on school education and also comment on Arpit's comment about one university every week. Well, that may not be the only method needed to increase GER. At the moment, we are very open to increasing GER in several dimensions. I remember whether from AICT or from UGC, and as a college, you know, every time you will get a letter, you want to start an MBA course, number of seats should not be more than 60. And to go from 60 to 90, you will take 3 years rubbing heels in the offices and get it done. It is for the first time that a policy declares that a university should have a minimum size of 3,000. So far, we were all accustomed to maximum size. We will not allow MBA to have more than 60. We will not have engineering allow more than 90, so on and so forth. So we were always fixing maximum limits and never really bothered about economic viability and survivability of the institutions. So therefore, I consider it a very healthy sign that for the first time, we talk about the minimum size of a university, that a university will become really viable, survivable, and then only the question of quality can be talked of. And therefore, 3,000 is the expected figure for our university to continue. So once we are able to grow the universities and the institutions in size, number one, it will help us in more than one way. First of all, GER will be easier to be taken care of. Secondly, quality will be easy to be ensured. I remember when I went to Harvard for some lectures, and I asked them, with what strength you started your business school? And they told me, sir, we started with a batch of 2,000. Having a professor gone from India, believing that an MBA batch will start with 2,000 size is unimaginable. And I asked them, how come in the first batch you think of 2,000? They say, sir, a 2-year program, then only we will have 4,000 students. And once we have 4,000 students, then only we can have 400 best teachers in the world. And once we have 400 best teachers in the world, then only quality education can come. Now, I was very pleasantly surprised that this is also another way of looking at quality. We have been conditioned to the fact that quality can survive only in smaller sizes. Well, that's not true. I've been a student of quality and reliability. Out of 400 papers which you mentioned here, I think 150 to 200 are in the area of quality and reliability. And I can mathematically prove that size per se has no linear relationship with quality, either for or against. You can have hopelessly bad big institutions, and you can have very nice small institutions. So you will have to build up the quality commensurate with the size of the system, and the models are available for that. So this now the situation is coming that learn to grow in quantity and quality at the same time. I think this is a very big paradigm shift which is going to come. Growing quantity alone will be counterproductive. Growing quality, keeping the size very small, will be counterproductive, because we'll not be able to afford that kind of economic model. But growing quantity as well as in quality at the same time, and it is possible. That's a first major shift which has come. Second is you start from child of 3, and many people have debated child of 3. It's too early. Yes, it is too early. But that is what the policy framers wanted. Please make sure when we say that they start with a child of 3, we don't mean give him 3 books of mathematics at the age of 3 or English. We mean teach him value system, teach him culture of the country, teach him knowledge about the country, teach him literacy gradually, make the game method of learning as the probably only dominant method of learning, encourage him to ask questions. Incidentally, our education system, whether it was from school, college, university, all were designed to kill the instinct of asking questions. We made very sure that I will tell the student, I will ask questions in the examination hall and you will have to answer it. And please make sure you will have to answer it in only in this format which I taught in the class. I think this is the criminal, if I use the word with due apologies to my senior colleague, Professor Jagdish Kumar, and I think he would agree with me. I think it's criminal that we taught that the only method of solution of a problem is what I taught. What is written in book so-and-so at page 237 is the only correct solution, and that is what I expect you to write. And that is where we killed the creativity in education system. Subconsciously, I won't say consciously, but our half-baked academic maturity killed it. And we killed it so beautifully that poor child even didn't know that his creativity is being stifled. He was very happy. I got A+ in all the 4 subjects. Parents were very happy. But what does that A+ mean? We forget about it. A+ simply started meaning vomiting out in the examination hall what was swallowed into in your on your throat in the classroom. Now, if that gives you A+, that A+ really doesn't take us anywhere far apart in the life, and that is what we are facing today. I've asked this question so many times. When we were stifled by Britishers, they were not allowing to expand us. We got 2 Nobel Prizes in this country. Dr. Rabindranath Tagore got the Nobel Prize in Literature, writing Gitanjali under a tree. Professor C.V. Raman got Nobel Prize in Physics, working in a laboratory where the total equipment was 250 rupees. So an equipment of 250 rupees could make him worth a Nobel Prize. And after independence, we have created buildings, mansions and mansions. Size has increased like anything. We have excellent air-conditioned classrooms, beautiful messes. When we were students, we were not even allowed a fan in the hostel room. That was the kind of scenario, which was not good, of course. But today, every child wants an air-conditioned room at whatever cost. And nothing wrong in it. But if all that I have not been able to get an answer, why no creativity Nobel Prize since independence after all this growth? I think the answer is because we do so strong lines everywhere. You must enter the school or the college or the university at 8:30, 8:31, you are out. You must learn physics from 8:30 to 9:05. You must learn mathematics from 9:05 to 9:40. All this is very well defined. Well, so far so good. In every semester, you must learn 5 subjects, and these are the 5 subjects which I decide for you. You have no option. You can't even question me why these 5. Whatever I've written, and you have to do it. Then you must appear in examination on this particular day. If you fall sick, God takes care of you. I can't help it. So we made everything so rigid Not only that, then we went a step further, and we are all responsible for it. There must be a course file. What will you teach which day? Now, if a teacher wishes to take the class little bit this way, that way, that's not allowed. I remember my English teacher when he was teaching us idioms and apple of discord. He says, can any student discuss why not Rasgulla of discord? And he spent full 30 minutes on describing to us how apple of discord came out as an idiom in English literature. Today, if a teacher does that, I am almost sure the principal will ask his explanation. You wasted half an hour of the class in explaining something which is not in the syllabus. So the syllabus and the curriculum became culprits in the domain of creativity, and except for some autonomous institutions, great institutions like IITs, AIMS, some of the universities, very few, we did take care of this to some extent, but too less in too little institutions. Talking about engineering, we have about 5,000 engineering colleges, and as Chairman National Board of Accreditation, I have not been able to accredit even more than 20% programs in the whole country. Well, that does not mean that we are very tough accreditors, but it only means that the colleges have not come up to a level that where they can even take the courage to apply for accreditation. They know they are not worthy of accreditation. Now, the question which National Education Policy has arisen is, once you know yourself that you are not worthy of accreditation, why should we tolerate you in the country? Why should we entrust the future of the students in your hands, the hard-earned money of the parents in your hands, when you yourself are sure that you are not worthy of accreditation? Our success rate of those who apply for accreditation after meeting the pre-qualifiers is plus 85%. So not that we are tough accreditors, but people do not have, they know that they are not eligible for quality education. They are not providing for quality education, therefore quality certification is beyond. So a very bold decision has been taken in this policy that the new norm of regulation, that's the sentence which I'm putting, new norm of regulation will be accreditation. And we will have to be all accredited in a span of time, which I will not like to quote here. Will it be 2 years or 3 years or 4 years? But within a span of time, all of us will have to be accredited. Otherwise, we'll have to find ways and means. So therefore, not opening many universities, but clustering is another method which has been thought of. I'm not sure you know it. There are more than 10,000 colleges in this country. I'm not talking of engineering colleges, 10,000 colleges where the total number of students is less than 100. All years, all subjects, total number of students is less than 100. Now, by what imagination you can ever make that college a quality college? And there are more than 10,000 like this. And then another 10,000 where the number is between 100 and 200. So probably we'll have to do something about clustering so that quality can at least be talked about. And friends, creativity will have to come in at every level of education. I remember the memorization versus creativity. A computer concerned Wipro made a survey in best schools of Delhi and Bombay quite some times ago, much before the national policy came in. And they asked the students a question: what is the chemical formula of steam? And hardly anybody could answer it. Reason is very simple, because no textbook gives the formula of steam. They all give the chemical formula of water. They give the chemical formula of iron oxide. They give the chemical formula of this, but nobody gives the chemical formula of steam. And no teacher therefore teaches it. And therefore no student knew it. The people who were conducting the survey felt very bad about it. So they just paid the travel to about 100, 200 students to come to an auditorium and started discussing. Said, none of you know the chemical formula of steam. It was not in the syllabus. It is not in the book. Teacher didn't teach us. Then they asked a question, what is the chemical formula of water? Everybody without exception, they were bright students of the best schools. H2O, sir, what are you asking? Then they said, when water boils, what happens? Says, what nonsense are you talking? It's steam. What else? Okay. Is boiling a physical process or a chemical process? It's written in the book, boiling is a physical process. Therefore, we all know it. Do the chemical properties change during a physical process? No, sir. It's also written in the book. Now, if water is H2O, if boils, it becomes steam. Boiling is a physical process. During a physical process, chemical properties do not change. Therefore, why can't you tell me the chemical formula of pure steam is also H2O? That was the problem with our education system. The student knows all the four facts. Therefore, I cannot give him less than A+, because he knows all these four facts. And still he cannot put these four together to analyze a very simple problem. And therefore, this basic property of asking creativity, asking questions, which we killed, has to be revived. I think at what cost, at what model, and I personally feel a teacher will have to be empowered in the new education policy. Institutions will have to be empowered. Empowerment, student will have to be empowered. So unless we empower the student, we empower the teacher, we empower the college, these things will not be able to flow downwards. I mean, whatsoever best intentions the Prime Minister or Education Minister or Chairman UGC have in this country, they cannot enforce all these things. They will have to be enforced at the level of the each institution, and therefore empowerment will come. And when I was asking about questions, I just reminded of a simple thing, a Nobel laureate in physics in 1941 or 42, Rabi. When he got Nobel Prize in Physics, the media people asked him, whom do you give credit for your Nobel Prize? He says, my mother. They said, is she a physicist? He says, no, she doesn't even know what science is. Is she an academician? No. Then how do you give credit to your mother for your Nobel Prize? He said, whenever other children used to go to the school and come back from the school, other parents will ask, what did you learn at the school? Understandably so. My mother will ask, did you ask any good question from a teacher today? And what was that? So she will probably make sure that I have a question to ask a teacher every day. And I should think of a good question. And that habit has given me this Nobel Prize. And a psychologist has worked out that on the average, a child of 4 asks about 73 questions per day. We may not even notice it. A child of 4, it's a research paper, asks about 73 questions per day. Maybe to the mother, to father, to siblings, to anybody who comes. And his or her questions may be very interesting. Why am I able to stand? Why don't I fall down? Why should I eat now? Why should I eat more? Is this food not enough? I mean, the questions may be foolish, apparently, but those foolish questions lead to the creativity, lead to the innovation, lead to the real answers. And that is what we have missed at homes. घर पे भी अब एक ही बात है, स्कूल का काम करो बैठ के. So we miss the creativity and innovation at home. We miss the creativity and innovation at school, in the college, in the university, and that's the price which we have paid very heavily, and we are not able to solve real life problems. Our world, nature has given so much water to us, but we have to buy drinking water, all of us. I mean, I really feel very concerned when I see in the morning the child carrying 5 kilograms of books in the bag and 2 liters of water along with to be taken in the school, because we cannot ensure that the school will be able to give drinkable water. I'm not sure how many of you know, USA in many states has banned bottled water. They say, we are sure that our taps give you drinkable water, go ahead and do that. We are very sure. You can bring your bottles, fill it up, and they probably charge something like $1 for 20 liters water to be filled up and all that. But they say all the water which we supply is drinkable, so no need of bottled water. Now, it's a very simple problem. But we can't solve it because we know only one method of cleaning water. We don't know how to produce pure water. People have experimented that you can mix hydrogen and oxygen in the balcony of your house and produce pure water. And several things. You can do artificial photosynthesis to get pure water. So unless you learn to attack a problem in more than one way, you really do not solve the problems. So my second take from the NEP is that multidisciplinarity only means you should learn that a problem can be solved in more than one way. You can solve it. I mean, you can go to Mount Everest via India, via Nepal, via China, via Tibet, via whatever. But issue is to reach Mount Everest. Our problem is we draw a GPS for Mount Everest, and that's the only thing which the child has to remember. He even forgets that the aim is to reach the Mount Everest. He remembers the route chart. And that is the issue which we have created. We have to somehow tell him or her that there are several methods of solving a problem. And each method could be a correct method. I tell them many times as a joke, but I mean it, that there may be a solution to a problem on Monday, which may not be valid on Tuesday. On Tuesday, I might have to think of a different method of solution of a problem. This is true in administration. Professor Jagdish Kumar would agree with me. We have to find different solutions in different towns, in different locations, in different set of students. You cannot have the same method of teaching, same method of tutoring, same examination system for everything. But we decided to go in for uniformity to such an extent that I am sorry, but I make the bold statement, uniformity proved to be inimical of creativity. And we did it consciously or subconsciously, because if I say consciously, I will also be a criminal in the whole process. So we won't say that, but subconsciously, so much uniformity. We need some structures, but we don't need everything to be done. Syllabus will have so many units. First unit will have 3 questions. First question will be seven parts. Each part will be 1 mark. Now that kind of thing takes away liberty from the teacher, what he or she wishes to teach, what he or she wishes to teach, examine. And that is, again, another point which I'll just take 2-3 minutes more in, because affiliation system was probably one of the worst systems, worst academic systems we had. And we borrowed it from Oxford. And the Britishers brought it to India. Oxford finished it 50 years before we became independent. But we were so faithful, we continued 50 years and then 75 years afterwards with the affiliation system. And we still believe we'll take at least 15 more years to get rid of it. But look at the system. Teacher is teaching so-called syllabus from a piece of paper for which he or she was never consulted. Some university professors sat in the committee room without ever having been to a college, an ordinary UG college, and do up a syllabus, and we have to follow it. Then somebody very eminent will be chosen to set the question paper. He has no idea about who drafted the syllabus with what in mind. He has no idea what was supposed to be taught, but he sets up a nice question paper. And then the answer books go to a third person who neither knew what was the intention of the syllabus maker, nor what were the intentions of the teachers who taught, nor what was the intention of the paper setter when he asked this question. And we believe our education system is improving in quality. I remember Einstein taught for 2 years, and when he was distributing the question papers in the second year, his junior said, "Sir, stop it." So what happened? He said, "Sir, you probably brought last year's packet to be distributed again this time." He says, "No, no, don't worry. Yeah, I brought the correct packet." He says, "Sir, but it is the same question paper which you gave last year." He says, "Yes, but I expect different answers this time, because I taught the subject differently. And moreover, knowledge has changed in 1 year. So if the question paper remaining same, if the student gives the same answer, he'll fail. And that's the beauty of examination system. But we tilt it up. We learn to thrive so much on MCQs. And I read a paper on artificial intelligence. They say a well-designed artificial intelligence computer can answer probably close to a topper of JEE. Now, if that be so, are we choosing robots for our best institutions, or are we choosing creative students for our best students? Is a question I want to leave with. I think I can continue talking, but that's not desirable in the time slot given to me. So I thank Sunil, Arpit, and all the faculty here and ITS as a group to give me this opportunity to share some of the ideas about NEP. Ideas are many. I'm sure at the end of the 5 speakers talk also, you will have words in the ideas, but wish you all the very best and thank you very much. I can only see amongst the speakers, Professor Jagdish Kumar here, so he will supplement to whatever extent he can, and then the other speakers will follow. My very best wishes and congratulations for organizing this and covering 23 states of the country, because every teacher will have to implement NEP. NEP will not be implemented by government orders, by HECI's orders, by notifications, unless teachers decide to implement it. And I think Professor Jagdish Kumar will bear me out. Even today, 75 to 80% of NEP can be implemented in the affiliated colleges also without any changes in rules and regulations. So let us start doing whatever little we can, maybe 10% every semester, and we'll go ahead and do many things. With that request to all my teacher colleagues here, I wish you all the very best. Thank you very much.